Welcome back, everybody. Today we're taking a deep dive into a really unsettling case, the murder of 10-year-old Jamie Rose Bolin in Purcell, Oklahoma, back in 2006.
Yeah, it's one of those cases that just sticks with you.
Absolutely, and I think a lot of people are at least somewhat familiar with what happened, but we're going way beyond the headlines here.
Right. We're going to look at the events leading up to the murder, the psychology of the killer, and the really complex legal battles that have followed.
And we've got a pretty unique set of sources for this one.
Yeah, we've got the news archives, court documents, and even some of Underwood's own blog posts.
It's a mix that gives us a pretty multifaceted look at the whole thing.
It's a dark case, but it really raises some important questions about justice, mental health, and the death penalty debate.
Now, Jamie Rose lived in the same apartment complex as her killer, Kevin Ray Underwood.
Just across the breezeway.
Exactly, which makes the whole thing even more disturbing.
So, to really understand what happened, we need to start with Jamie Rose herself. A typical 10-year-old, loved SpongeBob, puppies, riding her bike.
You know, hearing those details, it's just heartbreaking.
Yeah, knowing what's coming, it just underscores how vulnerable kids can be.
On April 12th, 2006, Jamie Rose disappeared after school. She was riding her bike near her apartment complex and just vanished.
And that's when Kevin Ray Underwood enters the picture. A seemingly ordinary guy, 26 years old, working at a grocery store.
But he had this dark side, right? This whole online world where he was expressing these really disturbing thoughts.
Right, blog posts about cannibalism, these dark fantasies. It's chilling to think about.
And it makes you wonder how many people are out there living these double lives online, expressing these things they'd never actually act on.
Yeah, it's a question a lot of people were asking after this case.
But getting back to the investigation, suspicion quickly started to focus on Underwood.
His behavior at a police roadblock was odd, and he kept giving conflicting statements about what Jamie Rose was wearing.
It's like he was trying to throw them off the scent, but the investigators were picking up on these inconsistencies.
And just a few days later, Underwood confessed, led the police right to Jamie Rose's body. It was hidden in a plastic tub in his closet.
God, it's just horrifying. Why would he confess so quickly? Was it guilt? Or was it something else, some kind of calculated move?
That's something we'll be digging into, because his mental state definitely becomes a central issue in this case.
So what did the police find inside Underwood's apartment?
Well, it's pretty gruesome. The murder weapons, signs of an attempted decapitation.
It's like something out of a nightmare.
Yeah, and perhaps the most disturbing detail, they found a meat tenderizer and skewers.
It's like his online fantasies had crossed over into reality.
The Purcell police chief, David Tompkins, said that the murder was the culmination of Underwood's fantasy to kidnap a person, rape them, torture them, kill them, cut off their head, drain the body of blood, rape the corpse, eat the corpse, then dispose of the organs and bones.
God, it's hard to even hear that. But we do need to consider all sides of this, including Underwood's mental state.
Right, because he was later diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome. And his defense team argues that this condition should be considered as a mitigating factor.
It seems like the trial itself moved pretty quickly.
It did. The jury found him guilty of first-degree murder after only 20 minutes of deliberation, and they recommended the death penalty.
Wow.
The judge agreed, and Underwood was sentenced to death.
But that wasn't the end of his legal battles, right?
He later appealed his sentence, arguing that the death penalty would be unconstitutionally cruel and unusual punishment given his mental illness.
And that appeal was ultimately unsuccessful.
It was. But the fight to save Underwood from execution continues. There's this petition circulating that's trying to stop the execution, which is scheduled for December 19th.
So what are the arguments in this petition?
Well, they say that Underwood's Asperger's and his depression should be considered mitigating factors. They also raise concerns about Oklahoma's execution schedule and the whole concept of the death penalty being irreversible.
It's true that there's no room for rehabilitation or redemption once someone's executed, but we've also seen cases where online activity was just a way to cope with emotions, not a plan of action.
Absolutely. And that's something the defense is going to argue, that those online fantasies were an outlet, not a blueprint for murder.
But on the other hand, Underwood did have the murder weapons, the plastic tub, the duct tape.
It does suggest a level of planning.
And then there are those excerpts from his taped confession where he describes this inner struggle, battling those disturbing fantasies and expressing remorse.
Which raises the question, if his mental state played such a big role, does that change his level of culpability? It's a question at the heart of the death penalty debate.
And then there's this other detail, his online relationship with a woman named Melissa Custer. She described him as seeming unusually happier on the day Jamie Rose disappeared.
It's a detail that just adds another layer of complexity to this whole thing. Was he masking his emotions? Did something snap?
And then there's his blog where he talks about feeling lonely and wanting a normal life.
It's almost like he was living this double life, struggling internally while trying to project this image of normalcy.
So we're left with all this information, these conflicting interpretations. On one hand, the brutality of the crime, the apparent planning. On the other hand, his mental health, his expressions of remorse.
It's what makes this case so fascinating, but also so troubling. How much does mental illness affect culpability? It's a really tough question.
And ultimately, that responsibility of weighing these different sides, it falls on Governor Kevin Stitt. He has to decide, justice demands the ultimate punishment, or is mercy, considering Underwood's mental state, the right path?
His decision is going to have a huge impact, not just on Underwood's fate, but on how these kinds of cases are handled in the future.
This whole case really goes beyond just Kevin Ray Underwood.
Absolutely.
It forces us to look at these big questions about mental health and the justice system.
And with that in mind, let's move on to what happened after Underwood's arrest and dive deeper into the legal battles that have followed. It's wild to think he was out there searching with everybody else for Jamie Rose.
Right, like trying to blend in with the very community he just shattered.
But then you see these blog posts, all this stuff about cannibalism and these disturbing fantasies. It just makes you wonder, how can we tell who's really dangerous? Like, what are the warning signs?
Yeah, how do we spot someone like Underwood before it's too late?
That's a question that a lot of people are trying to answer, but it's a tough one.
It is. I mean, in this case, Underwood kept all his darkest thoughts hidden.
Exactly. He had this whole secret online world.
It's a chilling reminder that we never really know what's going on inside someone's head.
Especially online, where people can create these whole different personas.
And then on April 12, 2006, you have Jamie Rose. She'd even been to Underwood's apartment before.
Yeah, to see his pet rat. She trusted him.
It's just awful.
Underwood's confession is really hard to listen to. He talks about feeling drawn to Jamie Rose, saying things like, I did kind of favor this girl a little. I was kind of like, well, I really like her.
Gosh, so disturbing.
He then goes into detail about what happened next, hitting her with a cutting board over and over again, describing how she was pleading with him to stop, saying, I'm sorry, over and over.
It's gut-wrenching.
Underwood goes on to describe trying to decapitate her body in the bathroom and then hiding her remains in that plastic tub.
It's just unimaginable.
And then there's this moment during the police interview when they're searching his apartment and he says, go ahead and arrest me. She is in there. I chopped her up.
It's so chilling. Like he's just talking about something totally mundane.
It's a confession that really sent shockwaves through the community and the whole country.
It's hard to believe he confessed so quickly and so calmly.
Right. And that's one of the things that fuels the argument for premeditation. The murder weapons being ready, the plastic tub, the duct tape.
It really does suggest some level of planning.
Underwood's attorneys are going to argue that his Asperger's significantly impaired his judgment. They're going to say that his Asperger's made it hard for him to control his impulses.
So they'll say that his Asperger's contributed to his actions.
Exactly. But the prosecution is going to counter that by focusing on how brutal the crime was and all the evidence suggesting he planned it out. They're going to say his actions weren't a result of his mental illness, but a deliberate choice.
And I'm guessing they're going to point to the fact that he tried to cover up the crime.
Absolutely. Getting rid of Jamie Rose's bike, talking to her father, all of that. They'll use that to try to show he knew what he was doing and was trying to avoid responsibility.
But then we have this other detail that just hours after he supposedly killed Jamie Rose, he was online chatting with his girlfriend.
Right, Melissa Custer. And she said he seemed unusually happier that day.
It just doesn't make sense. How can someone act like that after doing something so horrific?
It's a detail that really complicates things. Was he dissociating? Did he even grasp the weight of what he'd done? It's hard to say.
So we have all this evidence and these conflicting interpretations, the brutality, the planning, but then his mental health, his remorse.
And that's what makes this case so challenging. How do we weigh all of that? How much does mental illness affect culpability?
It's a question with no easy answers, and ultimately, it's up to Governor Stitt to decide.
Exactly. It's his decision whether justice means the death penalty or if Underwood's mental state justifies mercy.
It's a huge responsibility, deciding someone's fate like that.
It is, and his decision could have a big impact on how Oklahoma deals with these kinds of cases in the future.
We've focused a lot on Underwood, but it's important to remember Jamie Rose. Her life was taken from her.
You're absolutely right. We can't lose sight of the victim in all of this.
This case has to be about justice for her.
And justice means different things to different people. Some people might believe in an eye for an eye, while others might focus on rehabilitation.
This case really brings all of those perspectives to the forefront.
It does, and it forces us to think about what justice truly means.
There are no easy answers here, and it's something we need to keep discussing.
I agree. We can't avoid these tough conversations. This case should make us think about mental health, online safety, and how our justice system works.
It's a stark reminder that even in the most awful crimes, there can be all these complexities that challenge our understanding of justice and punishment.
It forces us to really look at our own beliefs about crime, punishment, accountability, and redemption.
This case is really about so much more than just Kevin Ray Underwood.
You're right. It raises all these broader questions about society and how we handle these kinds of situations.
And as we move towards the end of our deep dive here, let's look at the clemency process itself. What happens during the hearing? What will they be considering? So the clemency hearing, it's coming up on December 4th. What can we expect to see there?
Well, think of it as Underwood's last shot. His lawyers are going to make their case for why he should get life in prison without parole instead of the death penalty.
So less about guilt or innocence at this point.
Right. It's about the punishment. They have to convince the board that Underwood's mental illness played a huge role in what happened and that he's not a danger if he's locked up.
I imagine they'll bring in experts, psychologists, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Evaluations, maybe even talk about how he's tried to rehabilitate himself while on death row.
The board makes a recommendation to the governor, right?
Yeah.
But ultimately, it's the governor's call.
That's right. The governor has the final say on clemency.
It's a huge decision, not just about one man's life.
It sets a precedent for how Oklahoma handles these kinds of cases.
Makes you wonder, how often does clemency actually happen in Oklahoma? Especially in a case this serious.
Oklahoma is known for being pretty tough on crime.
Yeah.
High execution rate. Clemency is rare, especially when we're talking about the death penalty. Underwood's lawyers have a tough road ahead.
They do. It's hard not to think about Jamie Rose in all of this. Her life, her potential, it was all taken away.
Absolutely. This case has to be about more than just legal arguments. It has to be about getting justice for her.
And what does justice look like in this case? It's a question a lot of people are wrestling with.
Right. It's different for everyone. Some people see justice as retribution. Others might focus on rehabilitation.
And this case forces us to look at all those different perspectives.
There are no easy answers.
Definitely not. But we can't shy away from these conversations. Jamie Rose's death, it reminds us how vulnerable kids are, how important mental health is, and just how complex the justice system can be.
It is a stark reminder that even in the worst crimes, there can be all these things that make it hard to understand justice and punishment.
This case makes us really look at what we believe about crime, punishment, accountability, even redemption.
This one case, it's like a mirror reflecting all these bigger issues in society.
It is. Mental health resources, online safety, how the justice system handles mental illness. So much to think about. As we finish up this deep dive, I want to leave everyone with one last thought. We've talked about the law, the ethics, clemency, but what about forgiveness? Can you forgive something like this? What would that even look like? It's a question I hope people keep thinking about.
It is a powerful question. We all have to grapple with it in our own way, trying to balance the enormity of the crime with the idea of redemption, and maybe even finding some peace amidst all this tragedy.
Thanks for joining us on this tough but important deep dive. Hopefully this conversation has made you think critically about these issues.
Yeah, and hopefully it will spark more conversations about the complexities of our justice system.
And the need to keep learning and understanding, even when faced with darkness and despair.